through the month of November, I am taking a journey, talking to men in my life that I want to talk to about their own unique experiences. And I think there are a lot of things going on in the world of men that impact us all. And so I've been talking to folks in the kind of lead up to International Men's Day, which is November 19th, and Movember, which is obviously in the month of November. And today I'm talking to Mike, who was introduced to me by my friend Freed, who I interviewed in the spring for International Women's Day and Women's History Month. So she returned the favor and said, "Hey, you need to talk to this guy. You need to talk to him. He's someone you need to speak to about these topics." So, Mike, why don't you tell us about yourself? Introduce yourself however you want, and then we'll dive in and talk.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I really appreciate it. My name is Mike Joseph. I live in Brooklyn, New York, born and raised. I have worked in the music industry now for 31 years, since 1993. I do a bunch of other things in addition to that. Probably most important to this particular conversation is that I am a life and relationship coach. I got my coaching certification about a year ago.
Nice.
And for the past 4.5 years, I have hosted and produced a podcast called Detoxicity, which really focuses on masculinity and how to sort of change the narrative about what's considered masculine in society. And each episode is an interview with a different man, or in some cases, a group of men,
Mhm.
um, in which we basically just kind of talk about their life stories and things that they've been through, things that they've learned over the years, things that they'd like to see for masculine people in the future, that sort of thing.
Yeah, oh, I love that. I've listened to a few of your episodes, so I highly recommend it to others. I will be
Thank you.
making my way backwards through the catalog as I do things around the house with my podcast playing. This is another good one to have in my rotation. So I'm super
You'll get
excited.
to hear them get less and less polished as you go back over
Excellent.
time.
Yes, I know. I know this. I know this feeling as well. Okay, so tell me a little bit about like what was the genesis, what brought you to doing this podcast around masculinity and having these conversations with men? What was the reason and what was behind it?
I've always looked for community, and I've always tried to look for community with other men.
Yeah.
And I think once you get out of like the high school situation, it's very difficult to find that. And I think sometimes even in an academic situation, it's difficult to get that. And I've been through various things over the course of my life, and the first step was starting therapy, which I started in 2007. And going through that made me realize that I really had a desire for community. And I was doing, after a while, I started doing some public speaking with regards to my mental health, and would get people talking to me after my speaking engagements or whatever. And usually they were dudes. And it was like, wow, I can't believe you talked about this stuff. This is really brave. I wish that I had a space to talk about this stuff as well. And in like 2017, 2018 or so, I started an in-person men's group that unfortunately I didn't get to attend very much because it conflicted with something else that I was doing.
Okay.
So bad scheduling on my part. But it made me realize that people really want to have these conversations, and they're afraid or don't know what the avenue is to have these conversations. And so my New Year's resolution for 2020 was to start a podcast because I had some broadcasting and radio background. And I little did I know that 2020 was going to be 2020.
None of
Which
us knew.
yes, yeah, yeah, none of us knew. But weirdly, my first episode went live March 1st, 2020.
Perfect.
So yeah, I mean, we
Just when we
went
were
right
all,
into it.
yeah, just when we were all home with nothing to do in the
All right, let's listen to a podcast. Exactly. Exactly. But it was really just, I mean, it was born out of an idea to help myself, and realizing that as I was trying to help myself and getting help from others, there were other people that needed that help or wanted that help or just wanted to find a pathway to, or just to have somebody model behavior, just to
Yeah.
know that there was somebody else out there thinking the same things, going through the same stuff they were
Yeah,
and
no,
are.
it's so interesting. I think one of the things that pushed me to do this, other than that I promised I would do it in the spring when I talked to all those women. I was like, oh, I'll talk to men in the fall. And then I was like, oh, now I've got to do this thing. But one of the things that pushed me to it was a recognition among my male friends. Because I've always had a mix of male friends and female friends, and I've worked in a really male dominated industry. So I've spent a lot of time with men, and so I've built these colleague friendships over time. And I just started to realize that there are very few places where men feel, and I'll use this word, safe to have deep conversation.
Right.
And I think for a lot of us as women, we don't understand why. Because we sort of, I use the phrase, we crowdsource information as women, right? We're like, what should I do about this? What have you done? And then what I always think is interesting about women is I'll go get some opinions. I still do what I want, but then I have more data. I have more data
Right.
points, right? And I can still be like, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to take this decision, but thanks everybody, right? But I found in talking to men that when I would say, well, have you asked your friends about that? They were like, no, of course not. And it's very hard, I think, for a lot of us as women to understand why it's so frightening and unsafe for men to talk to one another. So, tell me what you think about that. Is it tied into sort of old school masculinity, patriarchy? Like, where do you think that shows? Why does that show up that way?
It is definitely tied into patriarchy, and tied into these socialized norms of masculinity that probably date back centuries.
Yeah,
And there's multiple things at play, but two things I can identify pretty much right away is that there's the sense that men, the socialized sense that men figure out their problems themselves,
yeah,
which history has shown we don't. Like it's not a thing that happens. We community is such an important thing. We all need each other,
yeah,
and I love what you said about crowdsourcing. Because look, I'm not sure about a lot of things, and getting other perspectives, other opinions has always been helpful to me.
yeah,
Um, and I really do think that people need to lean more into that via like creating a village, right? Creating a network,
yeah,
and then having people that you rely on consistently
yeah,
to, kind of help each other navigate our way through life.
yeah,
So there's socialized norms of masculinity, and related to that is the thinking that asking for help, that having close friendships with other men, that being vulnerable is either feminine or gay.
right.
And, again, it's sort of like socialized fear of femininity, socialized homophobia,
Yeah,
all of that stuff just kind of like trickles down and leads to this situation where guys get to a point where they're like, oh, I'm so afraid of being perceived by others as weak or effeminate or
right,
gay, God forbid,
right.
um, that I'm just gonna like lock myself in this hole and try to figure everything out myself and not have nourishing relationships with anybody other than maybe my partner and my parents.
Right.
Like that sort of thing. But it's just kind of like ingrained in Western society, American society.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it totally makes sense. I think what strikes me is that there's a real conversation out there. And this is where is the internet been good or bad kind of moment, right? But there's a real conversation out there about how women are not safe, right? We're not safe to talk to. We're not safe to discuss things with. We're not. And I think that some of us aren't. Like, of course, like some women aren't safe. But I also think that some of that is tied to this this feeling of the masculine feminine dichotomy is this kind of constant back and forth. Like men are like, I can't be feminine, and women are like, well, I have to be masculine or else I can't get what I. So there's kind of this constant battle being waged, right? And
Yeah,
I think that it creates so much conflict where I do think that sometimes women aren't safe, right? And that if a man shows up with some weakness, that they're like that they'll kind of dive on it, right? And I think that if that happens once to a guy, then it's all women are like that. Just in the similar way that for women, if they've been harmed, they're like all men are dangerous, right? It's this
right.
this all men all women language is dangerous
It
Um,
is super dangerous.
yeah.
I mean, the reality is that nothing exists in a binary, like nothing, literally nothing. We're born and we die. Those are the only things that are absolute in this entire world.
Yeah.
Um, you bring up quite a few interesting points. I think that like patriarchy doesn't just hurt women. Patriarchy
Right.
hurts everybody.
Absolutely.
And the hurt that men propagate towards women also hurts everybody.
Yeah.
And socialized masculinity hurts everybody. There's a sense with some women that like if their male friend has a close female friend, they must be sleeping with that
Right.
female friend.
Right.
There's a sense that if, a man and a woman are in a relationship and that man has a close relationship with another male friend, that they must be gay or on the down low and sleeping together.
Right.
Like there's, the possessiveness and and people don't kind of step outside themselves and think critically
Yeah.
about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And getting to whatever the next step is here is going to require communication. That communication is going to be difficult.
Yeah.
But in order for people to really like live their best lives, that those conversations are going to have to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I mean, I've shared this on a couple of the other episodes of this little series. Like I have a little bit of a hypothesis brewing, right? That
Okay.
so there's this statement that men are afraid, fear rejection, and women fear being killed or assaulted, right? And that those are the two fears. And my hypothesis is that neither side takes the other side seriously. And so women are afraid, but a lot of men are like, the women in my life don't have to be afraid because I'm safe. My friends are safe. No one I know would be like that. So therefore, that's crazy for the women in my life to be afraid. Meanwhile, the women in their lives are afraid, right?
Right, because the women have experienced situations in which guys have been like, I'm safe, and
Yeah.
have proven not to be. So it's
Yeah.
like, then there becomes a distrust.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when 60% of all of the homicides of women are done by someone that they know, an intimate
Right,
partner, family member, that by its very virtue means that someone who was supposed to be safe was unsafe,
absolutely.
right? And so I think that there is a feeling that it's overblown, and so women aren't taken seriously about that fear. And then I think the same thing is true, maybe to an even greater level, I don't know, of the men being afraid of rejection or being shamed or being seen as weak or being seen as not masculine, like we were talking about just now. And women are sort of like, oh, get over it. You're not going to die from that. Right. And so I think there's a little bit of that happening. And so it tends to sort of then build a
Right.
bit of a cycle. So I don't know. I don't know what you think about that, but
I,
I think there's
I
a,
do think,
yeah.
yeah, not sorry to cut you off.
No,
I
no,
do
okay.
think that there is a fear of being seen, like I said, as weak, as effeminate, as, like the worst thing you could think of is for a guy to be gay,
Yeah.
or perceived as gay or whatever it
Right.
is. So,
Right.
all of those things factor in. And I do think that there are a lot, maybe not a lot, I think there are women out there who have actually that similar mindset where,
Mm-hmm.
like, if, on one hand, it's like, oh, I want a guy to like take care of me and be a great partner and like all this stuff.
Right.
But also, if he shows a sense of weakness, if he shows a sense of an emotion that may be seen as effeminate,
Right.
then all of a sudden it's like, well, this is not the desirable man for me anymore.
Yeah.
Like, why aren't you being a man? And I've, like I've experienced and heard that myself.
Yeah.
So it kind of comes from all sides.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think fundamentally the thing that makes me saddest is the idea that, like, listen, men are not just hurting women, they're hurting themselves at crazy rates, right?
Yeah.
Like the constant suicide rate is just increasing, right? And men are just very, very successful at completing the act, right?
Yeah.
Women attempt more often than men. Men complete the act 3 to 5 times more often than women,
Yep. Yep.
right?
That is absolutely true.
And and yet, so my thing is like, I want men to feel like they can stop harming us, but also stop harming themselves, right? Because that isn't doing any of us any good,
Right.
right? And I think that to me leads into the conversation of like making these safe spaces. You were talking about community, right? And the kind of bravery or courage it takes to step out and say, I need to talk to someone, a mental health professional, a coach, or I need to get in a group of men and be able to actually share what that what's going on with me. Um, do you think that it's easier for men to do that in a group of strangers instead of
Ooh,
talking to their close friends?
ooh. I don't think it's easy for men to do that in a group at
At
all.
all, right? Okay.
Um, I think, I'm an open book now, and I think it's taken me some time to become that way.
Yeah.
I have been I've done group therapy with other men, and
Yeah.
I've been in that situation where I've sort of had to reveal myself to a bunch of strangers.
Sure.
And I certainly am pretty open about the things that I go through with my close friends.
Yeah.
And I have to kind of put myself back into the mindset of somebody who's not as open as I am now.
Yeah.
And both of those things are, I mean, to an extent, they're both still scary. I
Sure.
think the stranger thing is scarier.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Because when I'm talking to my friends, like I know who these people are. I know there's not going to be
Yeah.
judgment. I know that the questions that get asked will be asked out of care and love.
Yeah.
If I'm sitting in a group of strangers, like I don't know what the reactions are going to
Right.
be.
Right.
So, but I don't know if everybody feels that way. I mean, and the reality of it is that I value my friendships, and I have
Okay.
close friends who I have very like an intimate closeness with,
Yeah.
and a lot of guys don't have that.
Right.
So it
Right.
could be potentially just as stressful to be sitting in a group of your friends and be like, look, I'm struggling right now.
Yeah.
And it's hard for a lot of people to even take that first step and call a professional and just
Right.
like, I need to talk to a therapist, I need to talk to a coach, I need to talk to a counselor, I need to talk to a rabbi or a preacher or whatever.
Right.
It's so hard for even that first step, like the idea of saying it to a group of people. I don't know if that's easier or harder.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's been interesting is in these conversations, the words that some of the men have used around like when I've said like, why don't you talk to your friends? And they say, oh, it's just too risky or it's too high stakes or I don't want to be that guy. And I'm like,
Somebody's got to be that guy.
right. I was like, what's really interesting, I recently watched these, I think it was probably on TikTok or Instagram, men calling, just cold calling a friend or a brother or their dad, and just to tell them they love them. And those videos are just melt you heartwarming because almost to a person, the man on the other line laughs and then says, I love you too. Thanks for calling me. What's is there and there's a lot of like, is anything wrong? Right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
what's wrong? And
yeah,
they're like, nothing. I just called to tell you I love you. Oh,
yeah.
okay. Well, thanks for calling me. I love you too. Right? And sometimes it's the only time they've ever said those words to each other. These friends.
Isn't that beautiful?
And it's one of my when I see those videos, I stop and watch them because I'm like, just the act, like the it's only ever the face of the person who's making the phone call, right? But you can sometimes hear you can usually hear the other person, right? Because but I just think like if men would just take the risk maybe once or twice and see what they get in return, that it might really open some space up for them, right?
Yeah, you build yourself up for that rejection or that disappointment so much, not knowing whether that's actually going to happen.
Right.
And the truth is, like, we all take in so much and what's the word I'm looking for? Repress so much
Mm.
that the person that you reach out to might be like, thank God you did this because I'm going through some stuff as well
Yeah.
and I need to unload as well. So thank you. It could lead to uh uh I mean it certainly can lead to better relationships.
Yeah.
And look, I mean I've had to reveal parts of myself in various ways over the course of my life, and there's always that fear of rejection. But every single time that I've done that, it's been a net positive. For the
Yeah.
two people that might be like, okay, peace out, I'm leaving, 10 people have been like,
Right.
they're leaning in more.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, that's why, I mean, I've even said that just in the small things, like small things in my life. Like when I moved, to the other side of the world to live in Europe. And that meant by virtue of making that move that some of my friends didn't have the energy to stay connected to me,
Right.
right? Because I moved away. And yet the friends I have that stayed connected to me, that's deeper, it's intentional. Like I know who they are. If I said, "Can you get on a plane?" they would get on a plane, right? If like this, if I said I need you, if I took it to like DEF CON, 10 and said, I need you, they'd be like, okay, let me see what I can do. I'll get there as quick as I can. Right.
Right.
And I think, but you have to sort of take the risk of, I'm going to make a decision that's good for me, and someone may reject me, but I probably will survive it, and someone else will show their love. Right.
Fear is the devil. You know, so much of what we don't do and what we don't receive in life really boils down to us being scared of asking for the thing or
Yeah.
scared of making that move. And if you just eliminate that fear, because so many times that fear is unfounded,
Yeah.
like just do the thing and you'll be surprised by how much you reap in rewards.
Yeah. Yeah. Even as a coach, sometimes when I'm getting to know somebody and I say, like, what do you want? And they say, well, I don't know. I'm like, yeah, me either. What are we going to do about it? I don't know what you
I'm
want
not a
either.
mind reader.
Right. I don't know
Yeah.
what do you want to do about it? There's almost a sense of like, oh, we can do this together. Right. There's this relief that happens for the client when I don't have an answer. Because if I had an answer, then they would have to decide whether to take my opinion or not. Whereas if
Right.
I say, yeah, I don't know what you want, but let's figure it out, they're like, oh, someone to go with me. Right. And I think sometimes just like really having that bravery to say, this is what I need, and
Right.
stepping out into it is
Yeah.
huge, you know?
Yeah. So many great there, there's so many things that people are afraid to say that if you said them would just open up the floodgates, right? I need help.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Like things that are so like three syllables,
Yeah.
so easy in theory.
Yes.
But when it gets down to actually doing it, they're so hard to
Yeah.
admit, so hard to say.
Yeah. I mean, I was a notorious for many years of not being able to ask for help, right? Like that was my, I can do this.
Same.
I can do this, right? And so much so that a few years ago, I texted a friend of mine in the morning. I was living in Germany, and I texted him one morning, and all it said was, I need help. And my phone rang instantly, and he was like, what's going on? And I'm like, oh, I just need you to help me with, I sort out a bill because it's in German, and I don't speak enough German to sort this out. And he was like, okay, you know,
That's it?
he's like, oh, okay. And it was so sort of like, all right, whatever. But he was, and I said, man, you called really fast. And he's like, you have never asked me for help. And I was like, oh, well, I should do that more often, right? I should say, I could use a little help over here more often.
Oh
And
yeah.
it actually cracked something open in me for someone to say, you don't ever ask for help. So when you did, I came running. And I was like, oh, I didn't know I could just ask and people would come running. Right. But it is true. People do really do want to help us. And I wish, I hope that the men out there would understand that. The
Yeah.
women that you know, the men that you know want to help.
It is not unmanly to ask for help. Like
Mm-mm.
nobody sails through this life by themselves, right? Like we all need each other.
Yeah.
So, I think actively leaning on other people is super helpful.
Yeah, 100%. So what would, I mean, maybe this is too personal, but you can tell me it's too personal. What made you take the step to say, okay, I'm going to go hire somebody to help me? What sort of pushed you?
You know, I seeing somebody had been something that I'd thought about for a really, really long time, probably since I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of factors that prevented me. One, I just had like a financial barrier.
Yeah.
For throughout my 20s, into my early 30s, I was not making a lot of money
Yeah.
and didn't really have time to spare to speak to somebody. Beyond that, there's a cultural barrier. My parents are immigrants. I'm black.
Mhm.
Grew up in, sort of a not financially secure place.
Mhm.
I'm a guy. So all of these like socialized factors was like, oh, you're weak if you go and talk to somebody.
Yeah.
From a racial perspective, is like you don't go telling our problems to white people.
Just keep that
There's
in the
like,
house,
right,
right?
keep that in the house. There's all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it got to a point, and I didn't start therapy until I was almost 32. It got to a point where something had happened at work that really affected me badly. I'd gotten, sort of moved around without being consulted first from something that I was really enjoying doing
No.
to something that I was not going to enjoy doing. And it was a Friday, and I went home and I spent the whole weekend in bed and just was like catatonic. Could not move. Was just like, I hate my life. I don't understand why this is happening.
Yeah.
Like, I need to do something. Because if I don't do something, I'm not going to live.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I had met someone maybe a year or two before that who was the first guy that I'd ever met who had admitted to going to therapy.
Mm, amazing.
And that Monday or whatever it was, I called my friend and I was like, "Can you send me the number to your therapist?"
Yeah.
And that was the opening of the doorway into seeing a therapist.
Yeah. It's so important. I mean, just the fact that someone said it to you meant that you put it on a back shelf and said, "Oh, check. I know someone who's been to therapy and it's a man." Right?
Yeah.
Like there was that little, storage in the back of your mind said, "Huh."
As I've
Go ahead.
gotten older, modeling behavior is so, so, so important.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many, excuse me, things that people are afraid to say, that people are afraid to be. And once somebody walks through that door, has the bravery to walk through that door and kind of stand in their truth, then everybody else around them is going to be like, oh
Yeah.
crap, like I can do this also,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I mean, over the years, I've noticed that saying the hard things often then leads to everybody telling you that thing, right? Like
Yeah,
if you say, I had this thing happen, they're like, suddenly everybody's whispering in your direction, that happened to me too. And you're like,
it's
oh,
amazing how that works.
right. You're like, okay, we can talk about that. Right.
Yeah.
I've, as a, a sexual abuse survivor, right? For me, being able to say that without, I don't flinch when I say it, right? I'm like, that happened to me. I was abused. This is what I've done in order to heal from it. Yes, it has repercussions. Yes, it sneaks up on me, but this is what I do. One of the reasons I don't flinch when I talk about it is because then other men and women can say to me, that happened to me too. And your lack of shame. And I'm like, listen, I worked through all the shame. It's not like it didn't exist. I just got to a place where it's not my shame. It's that
Right.
person's shame. Right. And so it is, I'm similar. Like started going to therapy because I was at work and I was like, I am so angry that if I don't do something with this anger, I'm gonna hurt somebody. And I had never been violent in my life. Not
I
not
feel that.
not one fist fight, not one playground fight, never. But someone was in my office just having a conversation with me that was totally relevant. And I wanted them to leave my office so badly that I was like in my brain acting out what it would look like to push them out of my office, like physically move them out. And I was like, okay, you got to do something about this,
Hmm.
right? Because to your point, I knew that if I didn't do it, I wasn't going to make it.
Right.
Something in me, I was like, this rage will eat me alive until I cannot keep breathing.
And
That,
kudos to you for recognizing that and then doing something about it. I do think that people recognize it and then are just kind of shocked
yeah.
and don't know what to do about
Right,
that.
right.
Yeah.
And it comes out in, I mean, the thing is, these emotions come out of us in some way or the other. It's coming out, people, and I think like, and the bigger and stronger you are, probably the harder it's going to be coming out. Right.
Right.
Like if it's like, oh, I'm fine. And then suddenly you're, hurting yourself, hurting someone else, getting in
It
a
it
bar fight that you didn't expect
yeah,
or
it
whatever.
builds.
Right.
It
Yeah.
builds, and the longer you let this stuff fester,
Hmm.
the more it comes out in violence. Violence to others, violence to yourself, drug abuse,
Addiction.
overeating,
Yeah.
sex addiction. Like all of these other things are a result of just keeping stuff inside and letting that shit fester and fester and fester until it becomes malignant, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And I mean, the thing I say to people, men and women, is like, and I'll just say this now in case someone's watching this, like, if you are here and you are breathing, we need you here and we need you breathing.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like, anytime someone is struggling, I'm like, don't do anything. Don't do anything irreparable because we need you here. We don't know what you're bringing, and we want you here until we figure it out.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I've lost at least four friends to suicide,
Yeah.
and all of them were men. All of them were all except one were under 40.
Oh man.
So yes, and I struggle with suicidal ideation myself.
Yeah.
So I understand it, but also like had I taken myself out 10 years ago or in 2007 before I started therapy, there's
Yes.
so much good in my life that has happened
Right.
since then.
Right.
Um, you there's so much you miss out on, even if you go through more bad stuff. And it's not to say that I haven't gone through more bad stuff. Like
Same.
You know, there are lots of struggle days out there still.
Yeah.
But you know, I definitely do not advocate taking yourself out. Like
No.
there's you can get help.
Yeah, and I think what like just hearing you say that, I was thinking like if you had made that decision then, because I've also struggled with that. But if you made that decision then, think of all the conversations, these 4 years of conversations that would not have
Absolutely.
necessarily been had,
Absolutely.
right? The space you've
Absolutely.
cracked open for people to say, "Oh, let's have a conversation about that," wouldn't have happened,
Yep.
right?
You're absolutely
And
right.
like we don't know when we're in the darkest point, we don't often know what the what the light side will be, what will be the thing that we bring to light. And I mean, some of the guys I've talked to have said, oh, I don't have anybody I could tell that I was struggling. And I'm like, you can tell me, right? You can, anybody can tell me. Right?
Believe me,
Yeah,
you do.
yeah.
Believe me, you do. I mean, the last time, which wasn't particularly long ago, it's
Mm,
probably about a year ago,
yeah,
that I was in a really, really dark place
mm,
and I reached out, um, you know, and a friend like literally came over
mhm,
and sat with me, you know, and then another friend came over and like spent the night,
yeah,
like just like slept like sitting up on the couch.
yeah.
You know, so when you know, if you send the signal, people will respond to it.
Somebody will
You
respond.
don't
Yeah,
know. Yeah.
yeah.
You don't
No,
know
exactly.
unless you reach out.
Exactly. And that's, I mean, that's what I have said. Like my best friend, I can simply say it's getting dark in here. And she goes into action, right? She's like, "Oh, okay, what do we need to do? Do you have what you need? Are you gonna go outside? You need to do, she go, even though she's halfway around the world, she gets into action, asks me who I can call, who do you have, and I know because I've said this to men and they've said, "Oh, I don't have anybody I can say that to," and I'm like, "Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
You
There's
do.
somebody,
And it's
right?
also never too late to find
Yeah.
people. Like the internet exists, you
Yes.
know? You know, use things like the internet and social media for good. Find a men's group, find a support group, you know.
Yeah.
Go to you know, go to meetup and go to like local events and like grow your circle, like grow your village,
Yeah.
cultivate your community. Those things again are so important.
Yeah, no, exactly. And a friend of mine said, that even playing video games, where you're doing these connected video games and all of that can be a lifeline because you meet people. Maybe you're not talking to them face to face, but you're engaging and you can at least get to know a person and start to have like a community, right?
Yep.
And then you can kind of grow it from there and you can figure out how to go deeper, right? But start somewhere,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah. So, to close, let's talk a little bit about role models. Like, let's talk a little bit about what does it meant for you to have male role models? What does it mean for you to be a male role model? Like, tell me a little bit about that.
Um, you know, every step of the way as I've continued to mature, there's been people who kind of stood out as against the norm of what I was socialized to believe a man was. You know, my aunt's husband, my uncle, was really like the first person to provide an alternate view
Mm,
of what I was exposed to as a child. Um, and you know, I'm grateful for him in a lot of ways. Um, but you know, I had a boss and mentor for several years when I was in my 20s, who is you know the only person of color I've ever worked for in my entire life, which says a whole other thing that is a whole other
yeah,
discussion
exactly.
about corporate America. Um, but he saw something in me, like we met when I was 19, and he took me under his wing
Mm,
and really showed me how to be a leader, how to be a man, how to, you know, be firm and caring at the same time, like all this stuff that, you know, having, you know, I grew up without a dad.
mm, mhm.
So having that sort of older male figure to kind of like walk me through the game. Like everybody needs mentors. To this day, I'm 48 years old. I still need mentors.
Yeah,
Everybody needs people to kind of help them get to whatever the next step is that they want to achieve in life. And I try to, you know, it's all about paying it forward. Like, you know, the guys in my life, I try to like be, at the very least, be like a friend,
yeah,
you know. And if there's, I, you know, I keep myself open to if people need advice, if people just want to talk about something, if people maybe don't want to talk about something and just want to like sit and like distract themselves, whatever it is, like I try to make myself available whenever possible, to the extent that I can.
Yeah. No, I think that's amazing. And I think what you said, like sometimes people just need someone to hold a little space,
Yep.
right? And the amazing gift that it can be to just say, yeah, we can sit here. You want to come over and sit on my couch, right?
Yeah. We can
Right.
sit here and watch a movie.
Yeah, we
We
can
don't have
watch
to
a
talk
movie.
about the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the depth of a depression that I had a few years ago, a friend of mine said, "Come over for dinner," and I was like, I don't want to hang out." She was like, "I didn't ask you to hang out. I said, come over for dinner. I need to
Yeah.
function." And
Yep.
so I was like, okay. So I went over. She's like, "We don't have to talk, but you're gonna eat." And
I love that.
I sat we sat pretty quiet most. I mean, we talked a little, like small talk, right? But this was a friend that I could go deep with. But just the act of getting me out of my apartment, feeding me, and not asking anything of me was such an act of love that is really simple to do. You want to go get a burger? We don't have to talk.
Holding space.
Right? It's just space.
Yep.
And I think I survived that depression one of those events at a time through my friends who were like, "I'm coming over," and I'm like, I don't want." I guessed. Yeah, I didn't ask.
Yeah, that wasn't a question, it was a statement.
Okay, right?
Yeah.
Or my friend Nicole was like, "Mark's making dinner. He said come over," and it's not a question. It's not a it's a demand. And I was like,
Not a request, it's a demand.
right, all right, I'll come over. She's like, I was like, I'll have to take a shower. Nope, you don't have to take a shower. Come over just like you are. Nobody cares what you look like.
Right.
I was like, okay, right. And it was just the beauty of those acts of just holding space, right? Is so important. And I think role models can also do that for us. Like they can hold a certain space that helps us learn something new, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Well, tell everyone where they can find you. Like where can they find you and listen to what you're sharing?
Sure. Well, the podcast is called Detoxicity. You can find it anywhere that podcasts exist. I am on Instagram at DetoxPodGuy, so feel free to give me a follow. And you can also go to mike.joseph.com, which is my coaching website,
Amazing.
and you can book a consultation if you'd like.
Amazing. I'm so
Yeah.
excited. I
Yeah.
love having other coaches, especially male coaches, to point people to because, sometimes it's just not the fit's not quite right, and someone would be good for somebody. So I think I love that. So I'm super
Right. Thank you.
yeah, super
Yeah.
excited. Well, if you're watching this and you would like to donate to Movember, you'll notice a little QR code in the corner. Movember raises awareness for male health issues like testicular cancer and prostate cancer, but also for men's mental health and behavioral health and suicide awareness. So please go donate. And this month we'll see how much money we can raise for a great cause, helping men everywhere. So, Mike, thank you so much for joining me and having this chat with me. It's been lovely.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate what you're doing. Much needed.
Thank you.